if unions have to go into informal sector organizing, question is, how do we actually do it effectively? And more importantly, once you start integrating the informal sector workers into the unions, how does it actually impact on the union itself? On its governance, on the way it does things, on the way it thinks, and the way it operates. And to answer those questions and parts of them and even more, we have in our today we have here in our session a group of 4 people, excellent leaders in their own way. We have Raj here from the Defense Shipbuilding Workers Union in Kolkata, India. And then we'll have Jane, whom you've been hearing, and making excellent interventions the day and yesterday. Yeah, and Jane is from WIEGO. She's based in South Africa. Now we have Khalid. Unfortunately, I cannot see Khalid here, so I'll just ask him to stand up later on. And Ashling from the Sex Workers Open University here in UK. Now we'll give them 10 minutes each. I have a timer, and I'm going to cut off their microphone if they get over 10 minutes. Then that's only because I wanted everyone to have more time for the open forum.
This is Kamal Tewary. I'm a president of Defense Shipbuilding Company in India, Calcutta. Actually, the concept of organizing the informal sector is required and essential for organized sector workers. We witness sometimes the employer, even the government, use the informal sector workers against the struggle of formal sector workers. Say, in any manufacturing company, workers place their Chatano demand for justice, for increasing their wages. Government oppose this one, employer oppose this one. Then employer made a politics, and employer went to the contractor who is engaged into the company for salary activities. There was wide propaganda that permanent workers are getting this amount, informal sector getting this amount, even though permanent workers are going for strike, agitation. Okay, let them go for strike and agitation. To break the strike, they invite the informal sector workers to work to break the strike. It is not criticism. It is self-criticism of working class movement, and I am making that. No global union and not a national union, particularly in India, are keen and really interested to organize the informal sector. Number of global union in their membership, they have members. But if we organize a demonstration in front of the Parliament of India, that will be gathered not by the informal sector workers, by the party people, by the organized sector workers. In India, only 9% are the formal workers, organized sector, and 91% is a informal sector workers. 91%. So we we are operating some trade unions in Hindustan Unilever company, in defense buildings. Recently we organized All India Defense Federation. We have 4 warships undertaking private sector in India. One is Calcutta, second is Goa, third is Mumbai, fourth is Vizag, all the coastal area of India. With the support of our MRC people, Asia Monetary Resource Centers, we are able to organize workshop, and by that workshop, we form a federation, national federation. Across the party line, all the operating union joined with this federation. This is the organized sector. We, the organized sector, our union activist in Calcutta, there is about 900,000 informal sector workers residing nearby the shipbuildings in the coastal area. Our union activists, which we term them as advanced workers. Advanced workers. We discussed among the advanced workers 4 years back. Without organizing the informal sector workers, we cannot go ahead. We cannot confront the capital. It is essential for us to get organized the informal sector workers. Mostly these workers are engaged in ready-made garments, domestic workers. In India, domestic garment markets produces in Calcutta only. Delhi, NCR, that is, Delhi is the capital, nearby the Delhi in India, they produce for the export markets. But domestic markets produce in Calcutta. 900,000 people are working there, mostly female workers. Since last 3 years, with the support of MRC, we engage our advanced workers. We have not engaged any non-workers. We engage the workers, advanced workers, that is our council members. We plan every week you have to spend 3 hours among the informal sector workers. It is your routine. It is your routine. You have to spend 3 hours in every week. In first phase, about 60-70 advanced workers, they volunteer. Gradually that number come down. Now it is again increasing. We at the same time working with the organized sector, forming the National Federation, Independent Union, Independent Federation. At the same time, in recent past, we form a union with a 900 membership of ready-made garments. And we engage and build a team of the kite workers. You know, kite, which is, and this is the informal sector and domestic workers. These kite workers, they were also engaged and organized themselves. So, when we are organizing them, all the national unions, perhaps you may be aware of our old leaders, Brother Dan Gallagher also known well, that in India, every political party, from right to left, have their trade union wings. Every political party. No political party is surviving without having a trade union wings. All political parties, there is a trade union wing. And party politics is percolated among the trade union. Party politics is percolated among the trade union. And that trade union does not oppose the globalization attack. That trade union is does not opposing the neoliberalized policy. When first time in India a new economic policy, new liberalized policy announced in 1991, there was wide upsurge among the workers in mid of 90. I'm now speaking about the informal sector workers, and but among the manufacturing unit, jute industry, engineering industry, without any union, without any leadership, 16,000 workers in one jute industry in West Bengal, they went for a strike without union, without any leadership. This is a newer type of struggle, newer type of movement. Now it is our responsibility who claim as a committed to the cause of the workers. It is our responsibility committing genuine trade union to really organize this ongoing struggle in proper direction. At the same time, without organizing the informal sector workers, overall working class movement cannot go ahead. That is my submission. I think so. If you have any question, you may ask for.
Thanks for that, Raj. We do it the Filipino way. Sambagsa. Excellent.
What I'm going to try and do is to just give you, firstly, just a bit of a sense of the scale of informal employment worldwide, and then to draw some few lessons from the WIEGO experience, and I'll explain a little bit more just now about what WIEGO is and what it isn't. But just to say that sorry, I think I need to stand here. So, you can move over here? Yeah. No, that's fine. It's fine. That's good. All right. So, just to give you a bit of a sense of the scale of informal employment. Unfortunately, we don't have statistics up here for Europe, and really I need to go back to our statistics people in WIEGO to say that we need to include statistics for North America and Europe, because this implies that those regions don't have informal workers, and of course they do. So if we take a definition of informality as including workers who work in the formal sectors, but nevertheless have no regulation of their employment relationship, either because the employers are ignoring the law, or in some countries because there is no law and regulation in that particular sector. If we include that form of informal employment and informal work outside of an employment relationship, where workers are own accounts, street vendors, for example, or are working, and I'll go into some of the other sectors. If we look at all of those kinds of informal work, those are the statistics that we see. South Asia, 82% of workers are in informal work. Sub-Saharan Africa, 66%. Southeast and East Asia, 65%, Latin America, 51%, Middle East and North Africa, 45%, Eastern Europe and Central Asia, 10%. Those are averages in each of those regions, but within each of those regions there are ranges, which you can see for yourselves. So you can see that the scale is absolutely huge if we're looking at the numbers. And the numbers are ones we just can't ignore. So what does WIEGO do? Well, it does two primary things. We don't organize workers directly. We work with organizations that do organize informal workers, and it seeks, number one, to support those organizations to increase the voice of informal workers, particularly women, their visibility and their validity. And secondly, we work in 4 defined sectors. We're quite focused in the sectors that we work in: domestic workers, home workers, waste pickers, who in some countries are called recyclers, and street vendors. Those are the 4 sectors that we work in. And what are the things that we have found in our working with membership organizations that informal workers want? Number one, they want economic rights. They want the right to perform their work in ways that help them support a livelihood. They want legal identity, and they want social recognition as workers. They want social rights and social protection, because in most countries, even where social protection exists, unemployment insurance, medical insurance, and so forth, generally speaking, informal workers are completely excluded from those rights. They want voice, they want to be able to collectively express their needs, and they want bargaining power. And to do all of those things, they want organization. And very often, they have already created and self-organized. But those are the primary things that we find that they want. What are some of the learnings that I want to share with you? I won't read through the whole list, but these are the things I'm going to talk about. Firstly, number one, that dignity in work has meaning for all workers, whether or not they have an employer or not. And this happens to be a waste picker. She sorts all this dry waste sitting at the back of you. She sorts it. She's a member of a waste pickers union in Pune, India. And she and her colleagues, above all, want to be recognized as workers with dignity. What is one of the second lesson, and this is not in any order of priority, let me explain, that workers organize beyond trade unions. We tend to think of workers only organizing themselves into trade unions, but certainly the WIEGO experience is that we find informal workers organize themselves into trade unions, they organize into cooperatives, they organize into voluntary associations, self-help groups, clubs, societies, and so on. You find informal workers organizing themselves into a whole range of different kinds of organizations. But we, in particular, work with those organizations who we believe are membership-based, where the membership elects leadership, and where there is a level of accountability, where the organization is independent of any political party, and where the organization promotes collectivism and solidarity. Because clearly amongst all of these kinds of organization, you will find organizations that are not membership-based. But those are the kinds of organizations that we work with. The second lesson to draw from the way in which informal workers organize themselves is that collective bargaining can exist even where there isn't an employee-employer relationship. So, for example, many of the organizations that we work with bargain collectively with local governments for space to trade, in the case of street vendors, for access to sanitation facilities, and so on. In the case of waste pickers collectively bargain with local authorities to gain access to that waste, whether it's access to a landfill or whether it's access to street collection, and so forth. Street vendors also negotiate often with private city property owners. Okay, 2 minutes. Have I done 8 already? Oh my goodness. Okay. So the point being that collective bargaining can exist regardless of the employment relationship. Next point is that the global value chain goes beyond the factory. This is an example of a woman in Bulgaria who makes these paper bags at home. She gets paid 15 euros a day for making up to 800, which then gets sold on to big multinational players. Next point is that worker power is not only derived from the capacity to withhold labour power, which is the traditional notion of the trade union understanding of worker power, that we also have forms of disruptive power, economic power in the distribution chain. I wanted to talk about an example from Ghana, but I don't think I've got time. Environmental power, waste pickers in particular, and then what we can call symbolic power. And here I draw an example from farm workers in South Africa who closed down the national road between Johannesburg and Cape Town in the course of a strike some 3 years ago. I was also going to include a picture which I thought wouldn't be so good for either the GLI or WIEGO, but just 3 days ago the vendors, cross-border vendors who work across the border of South Africa and Zimbabwe, burnt down the Zimbabwean Revenue Office at Beit Bridge, which is the main border between Zimbabwe and South Africa, in protest against Zimbabwe's imposition of restrictions on the goods that could be moved between the two countries. But those are examples of symbolic power, which often have an important place in organisation for informal workers. Also, examples of successful worker cooperatives can be drawn from informal workers. Also, an important lesson, many trade unions have given up on the notion of collecting membership dues by cash. If you can't collect through check-off facilities, then you give up on organising the workers because you can't get the membership dues. Many informal workers have successfully been able to do this. And then a reminder that it's possible to organise and to service workers with very, very little. This is the research department of SEWA, which has 2 million members, but this is where their researchers sit and work from in Ahmedabad in India. Another lesson, simple messaging is often the best. Again, an example from SEWA, just has 11 points, and this is the message they give consistently to workers who they are organising. And then a lesson about community unionism, again drawn from SEWA in India, where they have successfully introduced peace centres as well as children's clubs. And they use that as part of their organising and servicing of members. And then finally, again an example from SEWA, that membership comes first. And you'll see unusually for a logo of a trade union, this is the banyan tree, this is the membership, and these are the structures, rather than the other way around. So thank you, sorry for that.
Comrades are doing it wrong way. Sambaksa. Thank you very much. I know that was very difficult to do it, but I had to rush you. Thank you so much. Now let's hear from Khalid.
Good afternoon, comrades. I will present a case from Pakistan, which is, in normal circumstances, you can say it should be a formal sector. But the conditions of the workers is of informal, even worse than informal sector. It was kind of a bonded labor situation, and that is the power loom sector of Pakistan. The power loom which is producing the raw cloth for the textile and the garment industry. This industry is mainly situated in Faisalabad, which is the third biggest city of Pakistan. And as the figures of informal workers are mentioned, the Pakistan also has more than 80% of the informal sector workers. Power loom industry is based in very small size of factories in the in the living communities in Faisalabad. And in Faisalabad, there are some areas. When you enter into those areas, you hear the noise of tuck, 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 tuck. And that is the machine noise, and people are living in that area, and they are working in small factories there. In 2003, one incident happened, and this is an organization, of course, of the workers. No one from outside went there to organize them. The workers have organized themselves. The situation in that industry in 2003 or before was like bonded labor. The employers were paying the workers some amount, and they were bringing the workers mainly from the rural areas to that city, and they were working in the power loom sector, and they were being, of course, paid very low wages. There was no written contract, there was no registration of the workers, there was no other facility to the workers. Most of the workers were living in the same factory or some other place besides the factory. In 2003, an employer registered a case against a worker, a false case of theft. The police came to that street and they started beating the workers. They dragged the workers out of the factory, they started beating the workers. One of the workers who were looking at that, he went forward, he stood in between the police and the worker, and his act of bravery inspired the other workers as well. They all came together and they started beating up the police. And the police and the employer, they ran away. That was an incident which started the organizing of the power loom workers in Kolkata. And that evening, and that worker who did that act of bravery, he was very frightened afterwards. He said, now what will happen with me? So other workers, they came together and they said, okay, why don't we have a meeting in the evening and we think about that, what to do now. So they had a meeting in a public park in the evening, and they said, we cannot fight this situation unless we start organizing. And that was the idea came from the workers themselves. They started organizing, and within few months, they had quite good number of workers organized. And of course, the police came back to that worker. They started to arrest him. There was a case registered against that worker. But because so quickly the workers get organized, at least in that area, and they went to the police station collectively, and they discussed with the police higher-ups that the actual situation was different and this is a false case, so they got away with that case. So this was the organizing point, and now this organization is a new kind of union basically. They are not a registered union. They call themselves Labour Qawmi Movement, that is the labor movement, Qawmi means national. But they are organized very effectively on the union pattern. They have more than 20 local units, not based on the factory level, but based on the community level. In different 20 communities, they have local units. They collect membership fee. They have regular monthly district committee meeting. They have regular units meeting. Every unit has 2 or 3 motorbikes and 2 or 3 full-timers. And they provide service to the membership. Because this is day and night shifts work, so even in the middle of the night, if they receive a phone call, the full-timers have to reach to that working place of the factory and they have to solve the issue. And they have adopted a new way of negotiation as well. They do not negotiate directly with employers because the employer is still they have their own association, but they are like gangsters, they are like mafia, and they have their own gangsters who try to deal with the union members. This unit is involving the district government, the city government in negotiations, and they are saying to the district government, and they are submitting their charter of demand to the labor department. They are not submitting it to the employers association. they are asking Labour Department and the city government to ask the Employers Association to come and negotiate with us. And there are three parties in that negotiation: the district government, including the Labour Department, the trade union, and the Employers Association. In this way, this negotiation goes on. And what is the negotiations for? Still, the biggest problem for these workers is to implement the minimum wage announced by the government. The government in Pakistan announces minimum wage almost every year. The problem for this big sector, which involves around 500,000 workers directly and indirectly in that city, the biggest problem is still to implement the minimum wage which is announced by the government for all kind of workers. And even though they are very effective trade union, very effective organization, but still the situation is that the implementation of the minimum wage is difficult. And then the health and safety issues are there. So with their effort, now the Labour Department has started registering the workers in the Social Security Department, which is responsible for the health and safety issues. Then what is their other strategy if the demands are not met, if the negotiations are failing? Then they have only one strategy, that is picketing of the government authorities. They are not picketing outside the factory, but they are putting pressure on the state authorities. And they are very political. They believe that it's responsibility of the state to implement the labor laws. So they are picketing the district administration, the Labour Department, the Social Security Department, and that's how they are forcing them to bring the employers to the negotiation. And at the one time what they did was they also had a peaceful picketing of the employer's house. That was only one incident that happened. The employer was going on Hajj, as you all know, and he decided that my sons are so, they're not very good and they will not be able to run the factory, so he decided that I will close the factory for like 2 months. And there were like 100 or so workers. So this trade union went outside the house of the employer. They just sat down outside the house with some white, what you call it, sheets. And that happens actually in Pakistan when someone dies and you mourn and you spread white sheets or other sheets and you sit on the floor.
As a kafan.
As a kafan, yeah. So what they decided that, okay, if these workers are jobless for more than 2 months, they are going to die with hunger. That's kind of a situation. So they went outside the house, they had those white sheets, they just sat down there, and the people who were coming to that employer's house or the neighbors, they were saying, who has died? They were asking us, who has died? And then the employer came to know that some people are sitting outside. He came out, and when he saw the situation that the neighbors have started coming to his house, who has died in your house, while the people are sitting outside. So he was forced in this way to negotiate with the workers and to accept the demand that the factory will be open for 2 months. He went on the Hajj, he came back, and all things were settled. But this movement has also faced one big challenge, only half of it. The challenge is how to survive the government oppression, how to survive the gangsters of the employers, at the same time how to develop the internal democracy. Even for this kind of movement, it is very difficult to develop the internal democracy. And there was a period when there were some divisions in that movement. But we're trying to work together with them, we're trying to provide some trainings and work together to develop this on a true democratic union platform. Thank you very much.
Hang on. You're not doing it properly again. Sambagsa! Excellent. And last and certainly not the least, Ashley.
My name is Gallagher and I'm speaking to you today on behalf of Sex Worker Open University. I've also been tweeting a lot, which you maybe seen me on Twitter if anyone's on there. SWOO is a workers-led collective composed of sex workers and some allies who primarily exist to fight for decriminalisation and sex workers' labour rights. While we do not want third parties criminalised, for instance, brothel owners or agency managers, SWOO is specifically for workers, not bosses, and we choose to organise together as workers and without managers. So what is sex work? Sex work generally refers to escorting, prostitution, porn, webcamming, submission, domination, exotic dancing, nude modelling, and selling sex on and off the street. There is no one sex industry, but rather many different forms of sex work, each of which is regulated in its own way. The legal models of sex work can be broadly divided into 5 categories: decriminalisation, full criminalisation, partial criminalisation, legalisation, and the Nordic model end-demand approach. Decriminalisation means that sex work and all associated activities, for instance, brothel keeping, which is legally defined as more than one sex worker working from a house, and solicitation are decriminalised, and sex work is treated similarly to any other kind of work. Workers can organise in unions and are protected by workplace health and safety legislation. This is the case in New Zealand and has been since 2003. Full criminalisation generally means that sex work and all associated activities are legal. This is the case in the United States, for instance. Partial criminalisation, such as in the United Kingdom, usually means that the buying and selling of sex is legal, but most activities associated with sex are illegal. Sex workers in the UK can't work from the same premises together for safety, and the police regularly target street workers with fines and protection orders. Under legalised systems like Germany and the Netherlands, sex work can only happen in certain places and venues, and sex workers are made to comply with special restrictions like registration and forced health checks.
Ashley, you can slow down.
Okay, I thought that might happen. Then you have, a lot of stuff to get through. Regulation is purposely made difficult and expensive, and legalised systems usually result in a 2-tiered system of legal and illegal sex work. Under the Nordic model, the selling of sex is legal, but buying sex is illegal. All associated activities and third parties, brothel keeping, etc., are still criminalised. When proponents of the Nordic model claim that it decriminalises the seller while criminalising the buyer, they do not realise, or perhaps they choose to ignore, that when associated activities like brothel keeping or living off the wages of a sex worker remain illegal, it cannot legally be said that sex workers are decriminalised. So why should trade unionists care about sex workers and sex worker labour rights? So think about it like this. Say you're a sales assistant and you work for a large national business like Boots or Tesco or Asda. Your boss treats you poorly, but you know you need the job more than they need you, so you put up with it. The workplace isn't organised. You're paid minimum wage, and even though you live in London, and you're a single parent with 2 kids to feed, you don't work full time because childcare is so expensive. It doesn't make any sense. You regularly skip meals to make sure your kids are fed and the electricity is paid. Your rent is going up at the end of the year and you don't know how you're going to afford it because you're on the breadline as it is. Hearing this, lawmakers decide they need to tackle exploitation in the customer service industry, and you leave because you've worked in the industry for years and things are only getting worse. You need strong unions and collective bargaining and to ensure that your basic rights as employees are enforced. It's good to see that the government are recognising that there are problems. But Parliament, full of people who have never worked as shop assistants a day in their lives, decide that the best way to tackle exploitation is to make buying products from your company illegal. It's still legal for you to sell them, but it's illegal to buy them. And they say that this will deter people from abusing you and your colleagues because they mistakenly assume that most of the trouble in your workplace comes from the customers. They're not entirely off the mark. Customers have been and can be abusive or dangerous. But the instances of that compared to the instances of when your managers treat you badly aren't even comparable. When the purchase of the products you sell is made illegal, eventually the company have to downsize and now you're scared you'll lose your job. You become even more worried about your money and more desperate to earn it in any way you can, even if it puts you in situations that you'd rather not be in. Your friend loses her job, which is her only means of supporting her kids. So she signs on and her benefits are sanctioned. So she can't feed them and she can't pay her rent. So what is she supposed to do now? What is important in the sex work debate is safety at work and labour rights. Whatever moral stance you have on sex work doesn't matter. Whether or not someone enjoys their job should have absolutely no bearing on the labour rights they have while they do it. It's impossible to criminalise an aspect of someone's job without that criminalisation having an impact on the person at work. Under criminalisation, sex workers, who are primarily women, will take bigger risks in order to earn money if they need it badly, working in unlit and isolated areas, working alone, offering services they'd rather not offer, lowering prices. So how do we tackle exploitation in sex work? No sex worker will deny that there are lots of problems with sex work as an industry. The myth of the happy hooker has been propagated primarily by people who see sex workers speaking out against criminalisation as a privileged select few who love their job and are unrepresentative of sex workers as a whole. It's unsurprising that only those with the least to lose, such as benefits, their kids to social services, becoming estranged from their family, feel able to speak out. Like exploitation in the fishing or agricultural or hospitality industry, the problems within the sex industry need a labour and union-orientated focused solution. The International Committee on the Rights of Sex Workers in Europe released a community report on exploitation in the sex industry on May Day this year. So what were its conclusions? Deeming all sex work as inherently exploitative denies sex workers agency. It means that exploitation and abuse is accepted as part of the job. This is unacceptable and conceals so many of the labour abuses that sex workers undergo. Most sex workers have very insecure, irregular and flexible labour arrangements which do not grant them certainty of income stability, nor do sex workers generally receive sick pay, holiday pay or pension rights. Instability and casual labour arrangements can also translate into an absence of workers' protections that are usually guaranteed by labour legislation. Workers in Europe and Central Asia usually don't receive any welfare benefits, and the ability to exercise rights as workers is incredibly limited, whether they're entirely excluded from labour regulations, whether working in informal or illegal economies, or when recognised as individual business owners. Therefore, collective bargaining is next to impossible. Sex workers have no protections as workers. They face huge challenges when trying to voice work-related concerns. The criminalisation of sex work allows third parties, such as brothel owners or agency managers, to take advantage of sex workers and capitalise on their earnings by taking a large cut of them. Many sex workers are obliged to give significant proportions of their income in the form of commissions, house fees, room rental, fines, etc. Undocumented migrant sex workers are particularly vulnerable to this economic exploitation and wage manipulation by third parties due to their immigration status. Additionally, it is common for the police to dispose of sex workers' earnings in raids, and that happens in the UK all the time. Hazardous working conditions are not uncommon. When work is outside of labour regulations, it also exists outside of health and safety legislation, and the laws that employers would usually have to abide by to guarantee workers' safety are not in place. Safety, welfare and well-being at work is frequently compromised by employers, managers and venue owners. Excessive working hours, being forced to see clients or offer services you don't want to, pressure to work when exhausted or unwell are named as some of the most common exploitative practices. So in summary, there are conversations to be had amongst sex workers about what kind of decriminalised system we want, especially as the decriminalised system in New Zealand is good but could be improved. And our communities are those places to have those conversations. And what we need is for trade unions to support us in this fight. Sex workers are the best people to lead on decriminalisation, because as well as being sex workers, we are academics and activists and trade unionists and writers and researchers and policy experts. So we need trade unions to get behind us and use your political strength to fight for decriminalisation, especially within the labour movement as a whole.
Okay, and then we give some bagsak. Okay, great. That was